Okay, good morning, everyone. This is June, Sunday, June the
24th.
the 24th, 2018, and welcome everyone to our Genie seminar. And welcome, Josephine, just joined us. We have a new member joining us, Nina Patrick. Just a very brief introduction of Nina. Nina has sort of a dynamo who is, with another gentleman, has started her own peace project in which she's done, every week she meets and does some other things. So she's interrelating with a number of other programs and doing a wonderful job of changing the way people think. Is that a fair statement, Nina? Would you like to say more about yourself?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Don. Well, Joseph and I are co-founder of the Milagro World Center. And so our focus is on, it's very aligned with you, Don. You know, it's our vision is humanity's potential realized. And so we're about events, education, and community space to support that. And yeah, so we have two weekly calls that Don, you know, sometimes jumps on, and I've been very excited, limited on time, but very excited about the possibility of jumping on this one. So thank you, Don, for the invitation.
Okay, and when we have more time, we're just getting into our program then. So this is the first of 7 word switches, and we've said that if we can learn these 7 word switches, they change the way we think. They elevate our way of thinking from our animal brain, which is an either-or way of processing information, us or them, good or bad, right or wrong, to our higher level genie organ, where we have a problem or puzzle-solving resource. That is our source of creativity. And some years ago, Margaret Mead, lecturing to a group of individuals, said, we as individuals create our own problems by the words we use. We use words that basically divide us into separate groups. For example, we're usually given a religious word, we're giving a political symbol, we're giving a patriotic symbol that says ours is the right country, ours is the right religion, and so on. And she said our language is young, we need to develop some new words, new language. And so that comes the importance we have of the language we use. So we've created 7 new changes, new word switches, and the idea is if we can just change these simple word switches, we change our words, we change our world, we change the way we think. So the first word today is I think I can, for I can't, why bother, what's the use, who cares? And these are the kind of words that shut down our energy factory. So the first word is and turns on our energy factory. It is a word switch. Think of a switch turning on a light, that we get light. Think of a word switch, particularly the word switch that has to do with I think I can, turning on our energy that enables us to be creative. So now I'm going to switch over to Brad Shepard's recording of the first word switch. So I'll share a screen, and here we go. Welcome to Module 2 of the Educational Community Curriculum, offering the self-taught mental skills that make our life wonderful. Today's trend addresses the first of the 7 mind-freeing, life-changing, world-saving word switches. These 7 word substitutions allow us to assume responsibility for our well-being as they free our thinking from the demands of instinct, tradition, and human dictators. Word switches are updated symbols that replace established symbols that have become ineffective and perhaps even dangerous. Practicing 7 simple substitutions creates a quantum leap in adapting our thinking to modernity. Word switches reflect our thinking energy from pre-wired animal brain to our problem-solving human brain, to assume personal responsibility for our well-being. The first strand of Module 2 is called the energy word switch.
Welcome to the first of the 7 mind-freeing, life-changing, world-saving word switches. This wisdom provides the energy to acquire all the wisdoms that follow. Substitute the word switch, yes, I think I can, for why bother? What's the use? It's too hard. I can't. To hell with it. Firk it. And any other helpless, hopeless, give up to your words that shuts down your energy factory. This trend turns energy back on that you've turned off. If you have forgotten, reread The Little Engine That Could. I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. I can. I will. We will. If you missed this classic, get the book and learn its great insight. It's a very short read. Remind yourself until it becomes habit. The way I think is my powerful resource to become my very best friend, to free myself from control by fate and circumstance, and to make a significant contribution to peace in the world. This first step will generate the energy to accomplish the next basic steps. The Little Engine That Could tells the story of toys eager to be delivered to deserving children on the other side of a mountain. The powerful engines who could take the toys to the children claimed they were too busy or too important and refused to take the toys to the children. The small engine had never gone.
Yeah, I'm going to stop for a minute. Would you put your mute button on? There's some background noise there, and if you don't have one, it can cause a lot of background noise. So if you just put on your mute button, if you're not speaking, and then we'll continue here.
On over the mountain, and the task looked overwhelming. Inspired by the tears of the dolls and the thought of the children who would not have any toys, the little engine bravely said, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, and you know the rest. The reason so many individuals stay stuck in an unhappy life experience is because they maintain a hopeless, helpless attitude ingrained from the repeated, you can't, statements learned earlier in their life. It only requires a small spark to get enough energy turned on to grow into an energy-producing factory. If you lack even a spark of faith in yourself, here are several ways to get one started. 1. Act as if. Go through the motions, even if you don't yet experience this faith. Actors know when they get into the role assigned to them that they may not feel the part. However, when they act as if, they begin to experience the emotion and the energy of the character they portray. They first go through the motions, and that soon turns on the desired experience. With repetition, the act as if becomes feel as if, and soon the as if disappears. Expect it to feel strange at first when we add or make changes to the way we traditionally feel and act. 2. Learn from the inspiration others offer us. Reread about the teenager who became suddenly paralyzed in a sports event. After a prolonged period of despondency, he realized from a single inspiring insight that he was miserable because he kept focusing on what he had lost, had not accomplished, or might never attain. He dramatically turned his life around to attain a joyous, fulfilled life experience when he focused his thinking on what he had achieved, what he had available right now, and what he could still do. 3. There are many inspirational stories that worked for others who had equally or worse situations to manage. They are readily available. 2 recent best-selling books, Tuesdays with Maury and The Last Lecture, are such inspirational stories of how 2 individuals, Maury with Lou Gehrig's muscle-wasting fatal disease and Randy Pausch with terminal cancer of the pancreas, nevertheless make their days worthwhile. What they found, you can also acquire and turn on the small spark that gets you started into an avalanche of life satisfactions. 4. In my youth, I wished I could flap my arms like a bird and experience the excitement and freedom of soaring into the air. I don't try it now because I've never seen that happen. However, if one day I looked up and saw someone flapping their arms and flying, I'd get very excited. I'd look for some directions to get started. You see, I wouldn't need to see a lot of people flapping their arms and flying, or even a few. Just one would do. I've seen many individuals who have hardly imaginable life hardships, but who just the same have created joy and meaning in their life we can envy. Each of us, you included, can generate the spark that turns on enough energy to get started. The succeeding steps get easier once we take the first. All of us make mistakes. If you are one who turned your energy off and beats on yourself because of past mistakes, consider this wonderful wisdom from Mark Twain. Good judgment comes from experience. And where does experience come from? Experience comes from bad judgment. Do you realize that the 100 plus wisdoms you will be receiving are the good judgments that other people have learned and make available to us from their bad judgments? Why learn from our own bad judgments when others gladly provide us the wisdoms they have learned from their mistakes? Today's wisdom is powerful. Practice and apply. I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. When you spot those helpless, hopeless trigger words that shut down your energy, let them know they have overstayed their visit and give them a good boot. You know where.
Okay, now I'm going to have to figure out how to stop the share. Okay, and we're back into our meeting. And Kathy, I see you've joined us. Welcome. And now, just for a new member, for Nina, the rules we basically have are very simple. Oh, and I see Basu is on from India as well. Hi, Basu. Just for Nina, the basic words we share that everyone can speak for 2 minutes. Speak as many times as you like. Try to speak to the topic. And we're looking to, there's no right or wrong here. It's just whatever you think is where we respect. And we're sharing our genius. The idea is we're trying to create a new way of dealing with things that is a better way than we've done in the past. And sharing our personal experiences, if we can relate it to our personal life, is the way it'll be most meaningful for us. So I'm going to turn over the talking stick now and share your ideas. Can you relate to this first word switch? I think I can, instead of why bother, what's the use, to hell with it. I can't do it.
Go ahead, Nina. Well, this is Marilyn. I had a nice experience this last week. This is the week that there are a lot of graduations in the East Hartford school system. And since I'm on the board, we get invited to all the graduations and get a chance to see different kids and hear what their experiences were. They usually pick 2 or 3 speakers from each of they're sort of different than the main East Hartford graduation. There's one called Synergy School, and this is a school that's smaller and a lot more individual attention paid to the kids. And one of the speakers was a gal who was 18 or 19, I'm not sure how old, but her story was that she became pregnant at the age of 15, had a baby, and she left the main high school and was placed in the Synergy. And she pretty much said that at the high school, everybody had given up on her and didn't think, having a baby so early, she would ever finish, she would ever amount to anything. And when she got to Synergy, people started telling her that other people, she used these words, other people don't define me, but if I think I can do it, I can do it. And she did have people at this smaller school encourage her, and here she was graduating, and when she accepted her diploma, she had her little girl holding her little girl's hand to walk up and get the diploma. And it was really very emotional. Here this kid who had sort of given up on herself, but other people wouldn't give up on her. She also talked about how nobody would accept when she didn't turn in a paper or when she was late. They didn't say, well, she doesn't care, and not do anything. They kept on encouraging her. So in some ways, she canceled out what she said. In some ways, other people did define her, in that they wouldn't let her give up on herself, and they kept encouraging her until she bought into it and ended up graduating. And that was a really inspiring story to me, to see how this, very young person was able to accomplish her goals.
Marilyn, that's a great story. I have a similar one for about a woman who's on this phone, Josephine. So Josephine is responsible, today in IBM for changing IBM's culture to be a more agile, more young, more caring kind of work environment. So I remember when she first started this this job, it was, let's put it this way, nobody has done this in the past. So this was a first of a kind, and she started with one site, and I remember her saying, "Well, I don't know how I'm going to do this," and stepping through it, I think just her attitude of perseverance, of having a positive attitude, not letting things get her down as she's going through this, enormous task. And now she has like 5 sites and started creating programs, culture programs in Europe as well. So, the power of positive thinking is an enormously positive effect on you, or on what you're trying to do. I always say attitude is everything, and I think that's a very true statement. If you keep a positive attitude, good things can happen. Let me stop there.
Thank you, John.
Abby, I see your lips moving, but you're on mute.
I was going to say, John, I had a comment that I see you're also living this, that after years of not being able to grow a mustache, you're actually trying to do a mustache. And that's a very brave thing.
I resemble that remark.
I've seen something, similar, but, if you want to go somewhere that's, if you're trying to get something done and you're not quite sure how to get started, it can be kind of daunting. But I think a lot of times if you just get started and sort of wobble around or muck around in making progress moving forward, you usually do end up moving forward. And it's usually not quite as hard as you think it would be, because not a lot of people will kind of get up and try to muck around and stuff that's got a great deal of uncertainty. So the people who actually do it, maybe it's not quite as difficult as you might think, or as you would if you're just trying to imagine how it's all going to kind of lay out.
Right.
With uncertainty.
So what about attitude? Is it like I say, it's all about attitude. And do you agree with that statement? Disagree with that statement? Or is it more than attitude?
I agree with it. I think that's where the energy, if you have the intent, that's very, very helpful.
Let me ask one more question. What causes attitude? What's the cause and effect of attitude? Or we know what the effect is. What's the cause? And what I mean by cause is what causes people to have a positive attitude?
I think sometimes you have to, if you're thinking negatively, a lot of times I'll find that I'm sort of down and not thinking in a positive way. If you can catch yourself and say, what are you doing that for? And sort of purposefully try to change what you happen to be thinking about the negative aspects of something rather than the positive. And sometimes that can take you out of whatever funk that you're in and get you on the right path. So I guess attitude starts from way back and years of approaching the world in a certain way. But I think, you can actively try to change that.
Yeah. Let me just one more question. I'll stop. What are there other word changes that influence attitude?
Well, we'll get into those word changes in the future meetings. We're going to take a different word, but certainly when you say I could instead of I should, instead of what other people tell you, when you say I could, you're directing a question to your higher level brain, whereas the should is the word that what other people have told you to do. And of course, words like I allow, all of the other word switches, they all have something to do with our attitude. But I think it basically goes back to Einstein's, one of his brilliant insights, when he told us that the most important thing in history, probably one of his most important thing in history was imagination. That when we developed the use of language, words, we developed the ability to imagine. We could imagine pictures, and we could take those pictures and we could take pictures and put them together. An animal can look at pictures, but we have the ability to look at pictures, put them together, and then when we put pictures together, we make a motion picture. When we make a motion picture, we create a story. And the stories we create are basically our attitude. It's the assumptions that we make that determine how we behave. So when we're born, we're given a whole variety of assumptions. We've talked about we're given a religion, we're given a political symbol, we're given a country that we're supposed to defend, and so on. But it's not until we develop these words and we develop the ability to have an attitude. And I just want to say that, add one other thing. The source of our power was identified years ago by Epictetus when he said that people are not disturbed by events in our life, but they're disturbed by the attitudes we take about them. So what he was really saying, it's the assumptions we make. The assumptions we make about who we are and what life is all about that determines what our willpower does. So we get back to willpower. What makes us different from every other creature is that we have the ability through our willpower to change our world. We change the way we do things. So I think that's the critical issue here from my point of view. The power of thinking is what we do is we create motion pictures by saying, I think I can. When we're born, we're taught by the most popular word we get when we're a child is I can't, you can't. You can't touch the oven, you can't run in the street, you can't wipe your nose on the curtains. There's not too many things you can. It's almost always what you can't do. And we get stuck in that way of thinking. I just want to comment that because this relates to our basic issue in these meetings, that what can we do about world peace? In interviewing over 200 people, and we can see these interviews, when I ask people, do you wish or pray for world peace? They say they wish or pray for world peace, but they don't do anything about it because they say, I don't think there's anything one person can do. I can't make a difference. And as long as people keep saying, I can't make a difference, we won't try. So that's the basic, I think, attitude. Think about your own attitudes about things, what you can do and what you can't do.
I agree with you, Don. That makes a lot of sense.
I think there's something, John, I think this is Avi, you're getting at something about positive attitude. I mean, attitude is everything, but sort of negative attitude is you don't really get anywhere, and positive attitude is you do move forward. I'm kind of hearing you're really saying that where does positive attitude come from, which kind of forward momentum.
Yes, I think you're right. Yep.
Avi, one of the things which I was thinking when John asked was precisely the AAA formula that Don had talked about a few weeks ago. One of the things that when we have our assumptions, and as Don said, through evolution as well as through our upbringing, we have a lot of assumptions, and it takes a lot of courage. So one of the things that we don't think so much is to have a positive attitude in all this negativity all around, it takes a lot of courage sometimes to take that, to have to question your assumptions and try to whether they can be changed, and it takes a lot of courage. Now, similar to what Don had talked about, Epictetus, there was another Greek philosopher or philosopher before. His name was Herodotus. He shared this great quote, which I really believe in, is, "It is better by noble boldness to run the risk of being subjected to half the evils we anticipate than to remain cowardly listless for the fear of what may happen." Now, all the things, good things that I have done in my life, I always look back at this quote and I see somewhere, like coming from India to America, taking a huge risk, uh, uh, doing a lot of things, going ahead with raising twins. That's a big risk. So, changing from one project to other, going into projects and working without having any knowledge of the technology. When folks, when I end up in a situation where the entire team is against me and I still stand up on my own and I say what I'm saying is right. That is something I'm doing in my current project, or doing a lot of things, taking a stand on world issues. It all takes a lot of courage, and courage is what which gives birth to the attitude that we have, positive or negative. I hope it is more positive than negative.
Interesting, this courage. I was picking up a little different thread on this, that what creates attitude was a kind of an interesting question. I'm just thinking that the environment that you're in, if you're in a really repressive environment where, you say, you're with folks and you sort of say something that's against the grain, or that's not of common knowledge, and everybody kind of pokes fun at you and picks at you, that's an environment where you don't really do things other than what everybody else does, versus an environment that kind of encourages people to take risks and do things that are different, and are rewarded, that they think, oh, that's really interesting. I remember a quote, or not a quote, it was a story about, it was a kind of a brutish existence of factory workers, where somebody said, oh, I'm going to go and learn how this machine works. You go learn how this works. And, his people around me says, oh, what are you trying to be, like the boss? Are you trying to be like management? And, really, or, why do you want to go back to school? And it was kind of discouraged, we're not good enough for you. So that kind of negative environment where, you're really discouraged or criticized for doing anything that's open or new, versus places that are encouraged doing things that are open or new. And I just, that question as to where does attitude come from, or positive attitude, part of it is, I think, that environment that you're sitting in, if it's very repressive, there's limits on how much positive attitude there are. And then likewise, if you're, in a place that always encourages new things and going out and exploring and trying things, you end up with a lot more positive attitude.
Yeah, Avi, I agree with you. I go back to the position that Josephine has on changing culture. So culture, I think, may be an influence as well. If you're in a place where the culture is generally negative, and oppressive, like you were saying, I think to try to have a positive attitude will be the exception, not the norm.
Yeah.
Right. So the whole nature nurture. Right. So we may have the nature, but if you don't have the nurture, where do you come out?
Two of the greatest exceptions to this theory of the environment. Now, environment does hold true, like it has a lot of value, but two of the greatest exceptions is Gandhi and Nelson Mandela. Both actually had the changes in their attitude in the same country, which is South Africa. Now, nobody has been persecuted more than Nelson Mandela, but when he became the president, he had the absolutely right attitude, and that is why South Africa is what it is today. One decision to not go back and have retribution against the white population there, once the Africans got the power in their hand was the greatest decision that Nelson Mandela made. Similarly, one of the greatest greatest incidents in Gandhi's life was in South Africa, where he burnt the paper, which was a law which discriminated against people of color back in probably 1920s or 10s. And when he was beaten by a police constable again and again for taking that paper and putting it back in the dustbin. Now, how much courage would it have taken for him once he was beaten pretty badly and he fell on the floor to get up, not retaliate, and simply take that paper and put it back? That is why, of all the things, courage is one very, very big uh, part of creating a good, building an attitude towards life. And then from there, Gandhi saw that how after beating the constable beating him for a few times, stopped beating him, and he knew the power of non-violence and
Yeah.
being when you think you are right. Yep.
So I think I think you're making I think you're making my points. It's the exception, not the rule. I think the two people that you pointed out are absolutely exceptional,
Yeah.
and not the rule.
Yeah, that was kind of my thinking too.
These are the two.
They're famous because they're so rare.
Exactly.
I think there are many more exceptions. It's just that we don't know about them. There are many more exceptions in every country you go there, where people faced adversities, came up with great Malala. No, I'm just taking some few names which are bigger. This small young girl, with no power, she refused to bow down to the terrorists, and they shot her. Can you imagine the kind of courage that and the attitude that she had towards girls' child education, and
Right.
the courage that she needed to have? How many of us do have? I don't have that kind
Yeah.
of courage.
Well, no,
If the terrorist
I
points a
think,
gun at me,
yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt. I apologize. I think courage is you're right on there. So continue. I interrupted. I apologize.
no problem. I think I have made my.
Did we lose him?
Yeah, Sharat, your connection must be a little weak because you're kind of winking in and out. Your voice is coming.
No. What I was saying is I made my point. I think others can speak now. No problem with the.
So, good morning. So, thank you, John. You're so nice. You have no idea how you're embarrassing me, but that was very sweet of you. So, I remember this flyer when I was like I don't know. I guess I was in my late teens, and it always stuck with me. And it said, "Your altitude is." I'm paraphrasing now. Your altitude has less to do with your aptitude and more to do with your attitude. Right? And it was much more eloquent than that. But it always stuck with me. So this notion of being persistent, and standing up for the right things is I think what, Sharat, those examples that you were given, is that there's some sort of fortitude inside the person that allows them to persist through to what they believe is the right approach. I think, but John, what you were raising earlier at the beginning was kind of, how do we instill that attitude, or how do we encourage that attitude? Where does that attitude come from, right? And I mean, isn't that the key question? What makes one person stand up to a bullet like Malala and another one, not? So, that's the key question there.
And I agree. I think that's a great way of encapsulating some of this, or abstracting it. And I think one of the operational questions is what in the environment helps the majority have courage to do what their feelings are, what their sensibilities are. And then is that something that's recreatable? I mean, I don't see creating a lot of Martin Luther Kings or Mandelas or Gandhis. You know, to spread something like this, or if you think that this is something that's worth spreading, it's more of an issue of, well, what kind of small environmental changes will affect the majority of people. You know, seeing those are great examples of what you can do with some courage. But, you know, if you can make the argument that this is, that changes of attitude, or, you know, applying word switches is a positive thing, how do you instill people to do that? You know, that part of the attitude is, well, what kind of environments or what kind of things can you do that will cause people to be open to those kinds of changes and be receptive to them?
Yeah.
That's
You
what
know,
I'm
this
thinking of saying.
this is where I think although we are trying to look at these word switches in isolation, I'm sorry, Don, I have to bring something else, because there is no way we can look at this in isolation. So when we are aware of a situation, as Don said, and we have courage to question our assumptions towards it, because we want a better action, and the action is the having the right attitude and getting the right results, then it doesn't need to be a Gandhian effort, or a you know, Nelson Mandela like, you know, nation changing kind of effort. It could be a simple small change in our lives that we could cause by changing our attitudes, or thinking I can for I can't is an act of courage, because sometimes I can't, but if I continue to see I can and change my attitude, I might get some small results. Then we have to do what Don tells, is self-endorsement. Yes, I did it. So that self-endorsement, you know, feeds into doing more of I can for I can't, they won't allow me, and all those things. So we have to look at it through other word switches and love creation skills, and then I think probably it will make more sense.
That makes sense. Hey, Nina, I know you're new to this particular Genie session, but in your work that you do, how are you finding, you know, changing, you know, attitudes?
Well, my audience in general, we've been doing our work for a long time. You know, we've been doing our personal work for a long time. So I would say that most everyone comes to our party with that positive mind frame. But as I'm listening to you, you know, I spent 30 years in corporate. So, you know, I remember. Let's just say I remember. And, you know, I think that, and Don speaks of this, self-esteem is so important. And so many times in a corporate environment, when there's ugliness or a bad attitude, or you know, just dis-ease, if you will, I think it has to do with feeling not good enough, or feeling that there's this competition that you have to be in. And so I was raised with that book, I Think I Can, I Think I Can. And I was an only child. So for me, really, it's not so much courage as it's been ingrained with me since I've been a child. And Don, you speak to teaching children, you know, these skills and these frames of mind, these perspectives, these insights, so that they can go out into the world and have that positive mindset. You know, for me at this point in my life, I'm going to be 60 this year. I feel that I've acquired this place where I can be calm in the midst of chaos. And that came from having, you know, it started, you know, the foundation of that was in having this positive mindset. But now I've watched myself grow to the place where, in spite of what's going on around me, I can hold that. So it's not even about my personal circumstances, but, you know, it might be relational, or, you know, what's going on in the political scene. So I'm saying, in summary, what I'm saying is that there are so many elements that come into play with a positive mindset. And
That's awesome.
yeah,
So nurture. So I go back. So your original statement, you said something, about your childhood and nurture. So that's an interesting observation.
I don't know if it was nurture. I don't know that I would define it as nurture. How do you define nurture?
Your environment,
Okay,
how you're raised, sort of the environment you're raised in.
right.
I would call that nurture.
Yeah. Well, if you talk about corporate too, there's not a lot of nurture in a corporate environment, right? And I think that could go a long way too towards a positive attitude. Absolutely. So thanks.
Yep. No, thank you.
If you look in history, I mean, we see that anyone who does something original or creative, for the most part, that isn't what the establishment says, is punished. Think of Jesus, who was punished for telling we should love ourselves. Teilhard de Chardin, who said we're spiritual people, and he talked about evolution. He was a Jesuit priest, but he talked about evolution, and he was told he couldn't publish his books. He was put in isolation. Most of the scientists, the Galileo, people, Freud, just about Darwin, all these people who came up with creative ideas were severely punished. It was only later, sometimes after their death or after they were assassinated, even that people began to come around. So I think part of the issue is and this is the critical thing, we're addicted to a way of thinking from the time we're born that's tribal, that was necessary, that said, what's good for me and my family and my tribe. That's something we'll talk about later as one of the word switches. But as long as we're born with this idea, it takes a lot of courage to get to the point of saying, I have enough love for myself that I don't have to depend on other people so much anymore. One of the first love creation skills is you love yourself with the abundance that you take responsibility for yourself. That's another word switch, is I allow. So when you talk about it's all these word switches together, but we have to learn maybe one at a time. And the I think I can is really the light switch. It is I call it the turn on power switch. That's what we do. We're turning on our courage. And so it starts with that first word switch.
I like I'm going to pick up on a slightly different angle on this, and that's the negative attitudes of some corporations that can be kind of oppressive. But in a marketplace, those people with positive attitudes, they end up being reinforced, and that kind of attitude in general, I would argue that people who are more constructive and more willing to take risks and happy with what they do are more productive. And those companies that form cultures that support that tend to do better and actually bury the ones that become calcified. I'm thinking think of Google's and FedEx's and the companies that come up with ways that, well, we really want to encourage individuals. We really just don't want to tell them what to do and then punish them if they're wrong. And that ends up reinforcing itself. And you end up getting more of that kind of behavior, and the sort of ossified behavior starts to die off. I think the East Bloc, West Bloc, what was behind the Iron Curtain, in a sense, there was two competing philosophies. There was, totalitarianism or communism, and there was market-based systems and capitalism. And just out of sheer, one was successful, or much more successful at satisfying people than the other one was. And over the course of time, the one that was successful basically won out. Is an evolutionary practice. So I think that there is, if you think that this is, and I do think that it is more productive, if people take risks, they have a positive attitude, when that's encouraged, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy a bit, that you end up with people, you end up with organizations and patterns where people really do, where that's supported, and you end up getting more and more of that. So I think there's it's not you just have to convince somebody rationally. There is, there's a basis for, if something's working, it tends to repeat itself, just like the genetics or evolution. And I'd make the argument that this is a more productive way, this is survival. Being adaptive is more survivable than being rigid.
Yeah. I'm going to comment on that too, because I don't want to leave you with the thought that that was my complete experience, that I described there, because, certainly there is a lot to be said for those that carry the positive attitude, and it becomes an attractor factor, is what I call it. Other people want to be around that energy. They want, I want some of what you have in the environment. And I worked for a company, I'm just going to tell you this really briefly. It was the 6th largest paper company in the world, and it was, in the United States, I should say, and it had 2 divisions to it. And there was a box company and a paper mill division. And one side of the business was run by the golden rule, and the other side of the business was more run by it was more dictator-like, and it was very disrespectful. So we had these 2 major divisions of the company that were almost like Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, and that was the interesting experience. And so, while you can have one end of the business that's operating in a completely different way, if you have this element there, it becomes a big question of what do you do with that? And the only thing that I could do was witness it, because I was witnessing the 2 different sides of the coin at the same time. So I don't have a conclusion to that, but I'm just saying it was very interesting to witness. So
Did they? That is interesting. Were they in the same line of business, or were they kind of doing different things?
They were. One side of the business was making they were the paper mills, and the other were taking the paper and making the boxes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was one more successful than the other? Was there any kind of evidence? Positive?
Actually, no. That division I was speaking of succeeded in spite of themselves. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Obi, you have to remember, the Germans succeeded for several years.
They did, and there's no guarantee that it's not successful. I have this, this desire, it's a wish. I believe it's a theorem, but it's mostly a wish that, when people are treated well, they tend to produce more than when people are treated badly. And if that's true, then, you end up with a desirable place to live in the world.
I'm sorry. I think the real question is, the Germans really succeeded very well, but at what cost? What was the cost? How many human lives were lost for Germans to succeed? That is the main question. You could show, if the numbers could have just one. We are looking at only one. Like I think you're looking at the one number where it could be GDP growth the Germans had for 15-20 years, but then how many people lost their lives is also another number to see. Similarly, for a company, for an organization which grows really well under a tyrannic rule, we have to see how many people become unwell because of they are expected to work 12-15 hours a day. How many people lose their family lives? So the organization could show that it is growing at 15-20% year on year, but then what is the cost to human life and dignity within that organization? That is another index which has to see, and we have somebody like Josephine amongst us whose precise job is to make sure that the human dignity remains while the organization grows.
I'm actually, I hear you, Sharad. I'm coming at this from a slightly different angle. you're making an assumption that there's somebody who's going to sit in judgment and sort of say, well, there's, success is really based on, are people happy and is the business successful? And I think there's a lot of people who really don't care about the happiness piece of it. And my hope is that if it turns out that people who run business models where people are happy are more successful, then we're going to get more of those. And if you put two people, you put two companies back to back in the same space, and one is, I guess we would think of progressive, treats their people well, and another one is tyrannical. If the one that's tyrannical tends to always beat the one that treats people well, my guess is we're going to end up with a lot more tyranny in business. If human nature is such that the ones that promote, individual and encourage risk taking and, people to be content and have work-life balance, if those job models end up being more productive than the ones that are tyrannical, you'll end up with more progressive companies. And my vote from a human nature perspective is if you stack companies up side by side, the ones that are progressive will outperform the ones that are tyrannical. And eventually the progressive ones will do better. And the reason I think that's so is that human nature, that people who are happy will produce more than people who are, under stress. I don't know that's a fact. I hope that that's true, and that's my sort of assessment of human nature. But I don't, outside of I want that to be true, and I think that leads to a better planet. It's the real proof of the pudding on whether it reinforces itself or the pattern shows up is it indeed true? Are progressive companies ones that treat people well? Are they more competitive? Do they produce more with less resources? And if they do, they'll tend to beat people. They'll tend to win in the marketplace.
Avi, you need to add one more thing to your formula. The sustainability is missing. So if a tyrannical company or an organization or a country is succeeding for years and years, say 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, like the Germans did. China, if you take China for example, how many employees in Chinese companies have basic human rights? They come to a place and then keep on working entire day and then leave. They have to sleep at a particular time. Everybody has to sleep from probably 1 to 2 o'clock in the afternoon in China, is what a couple of my friends who are working there told me. So my point is, yes, they show in the short term, they show a lot of success. The question is sustainability. The German machine lost, the Russian, the USSR lost. Everywhere where you see that there was a scenario created where the greater of one organization or one person was at the behest of everybody else. It did succeed for a long time, but all of them in the end went away. And the American model or the democratic model is what is succeeding, where people are relatively more. You cannot always have everyone happy. Somebody will always be sad. But where the idea is to make more people happy, to create an environment where if you really want to be happy, you can be happy. That succeeds. And that is what I think the sustainability has to be added there.
I agree. What my fear is, though, that this democracy it's a phase, just like totalitarianism is a phase. So the Germany collapsed at some point, but I'm not convinced that our form of democracy is going to always survive. I think it too may collapse and give way to another totalitarian regime. I'm not sure this is here forever either. Was it in Greece and some of the original democratic places, if they had a 500-year run, they did have a run and they kind of dissipated after a certain amount of time and something else took its place. So
I gotta jump in, Avi.
Yeah,
let me just
go for it, Josephine.
As a cultural change agent, let me just say, one, there are different cultures and people will thrive and succeed in different types of cultures, right? So Harvard Business Review did a really good article on cultures of companies. And they looked at the Googles, they looked at the Accentures, they did about 7 or 8 types of kind of archetypes of what, cultural corporate environments are like. And Huawei, which is the one they used in China, was actually the one that I worked at for 2 years. And they identified that one as an authoritarian type environment. Now, Huawei is extremely successful as a business. And I can tell you, being there for 2 years, yes, everybody goes to sleep from noon to 1. That's the lunch hour, right? And they wake up at around 1:15 and they go back to work. So yes, that is true, Sharat. And it's kind of weird being there as a Westerner there when all the lights actually in the building go out, right? And people are encouraged to go to sleep. But what the article was talking about, and what I learned when I came to try to, modify the culture at IBM, is that you have to work within the culture that's already there, right? So when I did my examinations of what it was like working in Google and working at different companies, it's like you can't go in and try to make an IBM a Google. You can't go in to try to make a Huawei a Google. Every place has its culture. So what are the outcomes that you're looking to change? And what is the culture that you think, as the executive leadership team, that you think your team will thrive in, right? So not only is it good for the people, I'm not trying to make everybody happy in the job that I do. What I'm trying to make it is the best work environment possible so that you spend a lot of hours there. How do you come to work and do your job so you're not disengaged? That's the point. We're trying to raise employee engagement. So that's my function. So when you talk about Abi, about what's successful, and yes, the Germans were successful for a long time. Sharat raised a good point. I mean, what's sustainable in the country? The company works within a world environment. So what's the current environment that we're working in and that we're moving towards? If you think that a regime like that is sustainable in this current environment, it's probably not. So is the world, so it's important, the leadership that we support, because it's usually top down, the kind of 15 or 20 years that we're going to experience, because it's coming down from the top until we make that change. So as a people, we talk about the attitude, we talk about what we're moving towards. What are we moving towards as a human race? What are we trying to drive as a culture in this world? And if we are standing on the notion of world peace, how do we then shape things around us, the leaders around us, the people around us? How do we influence that to move towards the goal that we're looking to attain? We're not going to get there unless we figure out, this way to change the thinking that is the right approach for us and for our tribe and for for everyone else.
Just one thing to add, Don, I'm sorry. When Obi, you said, right, that the democracy in America and other countries which have similar democracy, they do not change. The one thing we have to give credit to our, founders, both in your country and in other countries, is that the creators of the constitution, they left certain things, and correct me if I'm wrong. There are certain fundamentals in the constitution that cannot be changed. That is why it is difficult to this to die until there is a completely takeover of the company, like there is another country which completely takes over America or India or other democracies like France, England. They never go back to a completely totalitarian, because they are constitution based democracies, not other ways. Sorry, Don.
Our ancestors, remember, they lived on separate hills, and they had too many people. They had to compete for limited resources. And in order to succeed, they had to be powerful. They had to have more people. Those who had the bigger tribes could rule the smaller tribes. Those who had better weapons could be successful. So by killing others and by showing dominance, by power, in that environment, that culture, that was the way to succeed. And Einstein's point that I believe he was making is that the way we've learned to think for thousands of years through history has been you win by power, by having dominance. And then what he told us, which was the critical thing, is that we've become addicted to that way of thinking. My way is the best way, it's the right way, and your way sucks, basically. And what he was saying is the difference is that all of a sudden now we have a weapon that does not allow for us to have a win-lose situation. We can't learn by trial and error anymore. We've got to learn by prevention. It's a different way of dealing with things. But if we're addicted to this way of thinking, it is very difficult for us to change. And what I think Nina pointed out is that in her group, she's working with people who've already kind of fairly far advanced in thinking what's good for my family and your family, my tribe and your tribe. See, they've got this newer way of thinking. Most people in this group are also thinking the same way. So we're a very limited group, but the larger number of our population, by far the majority, is still what's good for me and my family and my tribe. And it's that addiction. And at the last meeting, I just want to mention that we were talking about the value of our meetings, our Genie group. It's by coming together in big meetings like this. It's by sharing our genius here, by sharing, as a Barbara Marx Hubbard idea, it's when we share our genius, that's the way we're going to come up with new light, a new way of thinking, of doing things. And that was Einstein's solution. Until we develop a newer way of thinking, most of us are stuck in that way of thinking that says the more power we have, and it works. It works for a long time. But that's, I think, the idea. We live in a world of change, and the big change today is now the smallest countries now, some of them will have weapons that destroy everything. That's what Einstein told us. This is different than we've ever had before, that where a small group can do something that ends everything. We've never had that before, and we don't realize it. Until we recognize this, it's only a matter of time, he told us, before somebody will push the button, and that'll be the end of it all. Now, we're near the end of our time, so I'm going to ask the people would make their last statements, their final statements, and then we'll conclude our meeting, especially if anyone who has not spoken, please speak up.
I'd like to suggest we pick up on Josephine's tack about sort of customizing appropriate ways of change depending on your environment and having that be effective, if that's what I heard is correct. I think that's really an interesting concept, and maybe a way to approach some of the change we'd like to bring about.
Are we still open to the idea of figuring out what we stand for? Like, I know what we stand for. That's not the right word. And is there an action that we can take in our own environments? We talked about PETA, we talked about MAD, we talked about, the 12-step programs, so they have kind of the mission and what they stand for and what they're going to do. Is there something that we could figure out that we could get behind, that we can see the rallying cry for?
Well, I've expressed mine, Josephine. Mine is that I think we have to create model Genie groups. I think we have to start with ourselves. It starts when we change our own way of thinking. We don't realize we're addicted to this way of thinking. So we have to wake ourselves up first. And we do that by groups like this, like Genie groups, like the kind of groups that Nina has been running and other people. It's that we're not the only ones doing this, but I think our idea is, at least I think my idea is somewhat original, that until we can develop meetings, virtual meetings like this, where people come together in large numbers, the fact is large numbers can make a difference. So when we become a model and we can start a free college level education where people learn the basic skills, the 7+2 word switches that we're learning here, and other other skills. Like Jack Canfield has 67 of these universal skills, but it's when we collect these universal basic skills, starting with learning to love ourselves with the abundance that overflows to enrich the world. That's the 2 love creation skills, and the 2 the 7 word switches that elevate our thinking from what's good for just me and my tribe to what's good for us and you, for us together. That's the change we have to make, and we can do that through groups like this. But first we have to be convinced ourselves that we have to come together and encourage other people to do things like this. I think Nina, I give her a lot of credit because she's devoted her life in many ways to doing this, starting up a peace group, and there are other people that are like this. We have to somehow connect with those people, and then there's strength in numbers. But I think and I go back to Margaret Mead's famous statement, never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world it ever has. We are the ones. I listened to Barbara Marx Hubbard saying that she's waiting for aliens to get into contact with us to show us the way and so on. And that's okay if that's the way, people think. But I think the answer is we are the ones. And unless we teach ourselves first, as we're doing right here, that's the purpose of the basic thing is we have to start groups like this all over the world. We're just a beginning. But I think my vision is that if we can do that over a period of time, it's going to take a little while, but once you get 10 groups that are doing this, then you can easily get 100, and then from 100 to 1,000. Once we get started, it can grow very, very rapidly, and that's what we have to do. Any last comment, and then we'll end our meeting?
Well, I'd love to pop in here. I just want to thank everyone. It's been a great experience. A little bit early in the morning for me to start, I must say, but I'm really grateful for all the different perspectives. And Don, I'm going to mention one of Barbara's quotes, and it speaks to the small group. And it's a quote from, she would always quote this from Ilya Prigogine. And it is that it is the nonlinear, exponential interaction of innovating elements that will jump the system. So when we're talking about making change, change enough to sustain this positive worldview, it is the nonlinear, exponential interaction of innovating elements that will jump the system. So it speaks to how important these small groups are. And the joining of genius in these small groups. I think for a number of years we thought it was like, well, if we get everybody under one umbrella and we figure this out, and we join all our genius in a big way, that's what's going to do it. But in my experience, and I think that there's a realization now that it's not in large, masses of population. It's in these small, intimate settings, where these new insights and perspectives are being revealed. And the other thing that I want to mention is there's a really great book called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership by Jim Dethmer that's out there. And I think that if you took a look at that, it might speak to some of the positive things that sustain a positive attitude inside of organizations, and they're going into organizations and doing some consulting. And then last thing, Josephine, you may be very well aware of Don Beck and Spiral Dynamics, but he speaks to customizing your approach, with different levels of consciousness. So that may be something of interest if you're not aware of his work. So thank you again. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you.
I hope you'll continue to join us, Nina, and we'll meet again, of course, next week. Thank you for all participating and sharing your genius. But I think we're getting there. I really feel we're making some real headway. And I go back to our initial meetings where we spent a lot of time blaming everyone else, talking about how everybody else was the problem. They will only listen to us. Now we're becoming a little more modest and beginning to look at ourselves, and I think we're headed in the right track. And I look forward to our future meetings. So have a good week, everyone. And I'm going to stop our recording at this point. So let's see.